All right, we are live. We are rocking and ready. Hey, you, and welcome on my Mike and Jim Appel That Chapter podcasts. Something, yeah, that's words in other languages, which I have no idea what I just said, but I hope it made sense to you if you also understand those languages. All right, so in this whole episode of the That Chapter podcast, it's a Mike solo coming straight at you to your earballs, and today we got, this is a weird one, and by weird I mean kind of awful. It's a highly requested topic, actually. Going back yonks, if you can believe that. Put that in your pipe and smoke it. This is in fact one of the most tragic incidents in England. It led to a lot of changes in that country. It changed gun laws forever there. Well, or I mean, at least to present day. And this is about a guy named Michael Robert Ryan who sucked ass just so much. He sucked ass. I don't know how else to put that, but he was an awful piece of shit. Now, before I get into today's episode, I just want to say thank you so much for listening, everybody. It really means the world to me. I hope you enjoyed the episodes where it's me by myself, or it's me with either Dirty Keith or the Warthog. And also, please keep sending in those listener stories, guys. They're great. I actually got a whole flurry of them recently, and I have to say, going through them all, pretty good. Y'all got some weird, either you guys are the most schizophrenic audience that's ever lived, or you guys have got some great stories and have lived some wild times. So I enjoy them both, and please don't stop sending them in to mikeohhello@gmail.com. Now, let's give this old story a go. The story of Michael Robert Ryan and the Hungerford Massacre. At 1:15 p.m. on Wednesday, 19th of August, 1987, Myra Rose had just sat down there now in Savernake Forest reading a book when she was approached by two young children. Hannah was 4 years old and James 2. Now, Myra, reading her book in this forest on this nice, beautiful summer's day, she was kind of alarmed to see two such young children just walking unescorted in the forest. What are these kids doing here by themselves? And her alarm was only increased when these two kids waddled up to her. They introduced themselves as Hannah and James, and they told her that a man in black had just killed their mom. Myra was a wee bit taken aback by this. She took the children, one in each hand, and not knowing it, maybe they're just confused or kids' imaginations, what? If they had really seen what they just said they had seen. So Myra took the children to there was a bigger group of picnickers not far away. Then they called 999, the police number, and they waited there until the bobbies, I believe they called them in the UK, the bobbies arrived. Now, those two children, Hannah and James, you won't find them on any of the victims' lists when you're talking about the Hungerford Massacre. But they were both most definitely victims of Michael Ryan that day. The incident, which will be remembered forever as the Hungerford Massacre, it actually started not in Hungerford, if you can believe that. It started across the county border in a place called Wiltshire.
I think something's wrong with the wheelchair.
Now, the exact timeline of what happened that day can't be precisely confirmed, since the only person who knows the exact route is Michael Ryan himself. But it's thought that the rampage, which would end 6.5 hours later at John O'Gaunt School in Hungerford, began right there, in Savernake Forest, a well-known beauty spot. Savernake Forest, it's a popular destination for family days out, you know yourself. Getting your picnic, your little ham sandwiches, and your tea, or what do people do at picnics these days? I don't like tea, and I don't really eat ham sandwiches, but probably something like that. Beer and hot dogs, perchance? Maybe.
I wasn't drinking, I was having a picnic. We had 3 different flavours of crisps.
Regardless, it was a picnic that drew 33-year-old Susan Godfrey out to the forest that morning with her 2 young children. See, Susan Godfrey had planned on a picnic lunch with her 2 young children in the forest that afternoon, but unfortunately, as we know, Michael Ryan came across them. Police would later find the children's mother's body, Susan Godfrey's body, near to the tarp that Ryan had taken from their car after he murdered their mother. Now, it's been speculated in the following years that this was actually part of an attempted rape gone wrong, and Susan had been shot when she tried to escape from Ryan. That may be true, but we'll never know for sure. Police discovered that the children had in fact walked almost 2 miles until they eventually wandered into Myra, who was reading her book. Now, at the time, after the police responded to this, the police in Savernake, they had no idea, though, that something even more horrendous was happening just 10 miles away. And they had no reason at all to think this was all linked. Now, Hungerford, it's a small, historic market town in Berkshire, England. Hungerford is probably kind of what most people imagine when you think of the phrase, a quaint little English countryside town. It's about 60 miles to the west of London, boasts a long and rich history of old English things. English people who are listening, you know what I'm talking about. It's an older and pretty well-to-do community, lots of retirees, with a corresponding and astonishingly low crime rate. The last murder recorded in Hungerford took place 111 years earlier. Yes, over 100 years since the last murder. In 1987, the year of our story, the population was around give or take 5,000 people. On the morning of the shootings in that area, I mean like police presence in the area, there was only 4 officers, 2 patrol constables, a sergeant and a station duty officer. That was it. As I said, it had been 111 years since the last murder, so there wasn't exactly, a heavy police presence in this area, and a lot of the police officers who worked there, they weren't full-time. So what happened in Hungerford is it's one of the main reasons, in fact, to get this for the prohibition of firearms in the UK. After the publication of the Hungerford Report, which is a great resource in this case, all semi-automatic weapons were banned outright in the UK and others were heavily restricted. The UK today, it's home to some of the strictest gun laws anywhere in the world, mainly due to what happened this day. See, at the time of his meltdown, 27-year-old Michael Ryan, he had 5 guns, including a 9mm Beretta pistol, 2 shotguns, and 2 rifles. One of those rifles was an AK-47 he would do a lot of damage with. See, Michael Robert Ryan was born on May 18, 1960, to parents Alfred and Dorothy Ryan. Alfred was said to be delighted with the news he'd be a father, as he was 55 years old at the time and he thought he had missed, his chance to have children. Dorothy was 13 years younger than Alfred, but equally as happy to become a mother and complete their little family. Dorothy absolutely doted on Michael and supported him in every single thing he did, which wasn't always for the best. You don't have to support your kids in everything, folks. Some things you can kind of pull back on as, maybe don't. Maybe you're shite at that. Just tell them they're shite at that and don't go ahead with it.
You suck.
See, Michael, he finished his formal education by aged 16, and he spent most of his life unemployed, with brief stints here and there as a labourer, and even on the rarer occasion he dealt in some antiques, but nothing ever lasted. And Michael relied on living at home and his dole money, his government money, just to get by. He was known to like fast cars, and his mother would buy him a brand new car every couple of years, despite money being very tight for the pair of them, living on overdrafts. Alfred died from cancer in 1985, aged 78, leaving Michael and Dorothy alone in their own little world. Ryan was known to be a loner and a bit of a fantasist, something his mother, as I said, she did little to discourage the world he lived in, and sometimes Dorothy would actually join him in these weird created realities. Shortly before he would go on the rampage that would make his name infamous, not famous, infamous across the country, Ryan had begun telling people that he'd recently been befriended by an army colonel who was giving him flying lessons and had also offered to buy him, guess what, a brand new Ferrari. Look at you! His mother had apparently also told her friends and acquaintances that, hey, listen, guess what, this will make you jealous. She had also stayed at the colonel's home and that he'd promised to give her her very own house. Now, of course, none of this was true. There was no house, no Ferrari, and no colonel, but they both lived in this fantasy world and invented these characters. What the shit? Yeah, I heard you. Yeah, I can hear you from here, folks. What the shit? In hindsight, Michael Ryan, he was kind of like the cliche, I guess what you'd think of now is like an incel, little bitch, spree killer kind of in the making. He was obsessed with guns and survival lifestyle, and there's nothing wrong with that, but he also, at the same time, formed no relationships outside of his immediate family, was unemployed, had zero luck with the ladies, kind of just stayed in his little basement all day. I'm kind of always loth to describe people. I loathe kind of describing people as little incel killers, because it's kind of just a tar all brush, but he was kind of exactly that. He lived at home with his mom, had no friends, stayed inside all day creating these little fantasy worlds, and then got upset that nobody wanted to be his friend when he sounds like he was just a fucking loser. But regardless, let's move on. Now, it's worth also noting, though, leading up to the events of the 19th of August, 1987, no one, though, would have pointed a finger in his direction at, doing what he would do. He had no diagnosed mental issues or disorders. He was seen as a nice, quiet guy on the outside. So quite what it was that triggered Michael Ryan's complete break from reality, we'll never really know. But what we do know is that the spree that began in Savernake with the murder of Susan Godfrey in the forest and her kids being, well, they managed to escape thankfully, it kicked into gear 90 minutes later, 20 miles away, at the Golden Arrow Services, which was a gas station, and this was 3 miles just outside of Hungerford town. After filling the tank of his car to the brim, and also filling a jerry can, Ryan walked calmly up to the counter of the service station, raised his rifle, took aim, and fired at Kaboob Dean, the cashier at the petrol station. Now, luckily for Mrs. Dean, she'd spotted the weapon as he walked in with a rifle. She couldn't exactly miss it, and then she dove for cover as Ryan pulled the trigger. Infuriated at missing the first shot, Ryan was not having that. He walked up to the cashier and at point blank range, he squeezed the trigger again as she hid on the ground. But the firearm malfunctioned and Mrs. Dean was spared. Many would not be so lucky. The first 999 call of that day went into the police from motorcyclist Ian George about the shooting at the petrol station. George, he was a motorcyclist, just happened to be there at the time. He thought it was an attempted robbery. He didn't realize Michael Ryan had no interest in the pounds in the cash register. Then 2 unarmed police officers, a Jim Wood and a Roger Brereton, they responded. Now, though they were forced to attend the scene separately in different cars due to one of them being held back to finish paperwork, little did they know what they were walking into, and these 2 men, Jim Wood and Roger Brereton, would be the first on the scene for the massacre and, well, they would be busy men. It was minutes later after this, at around 12:45 p.m, Michael Ryan arrived back at the home he shared with his mother in Hungerford. This is on Southview Street, a nice regular terraced street, all the houses were terraced, and he began to douse his home in petrol using the can he had just filled at the Golden Arrow Services. Now his mother Dorothy, she was not home at the time. He then threw a bag filled with his survival gear and 3 of his guns, 2 rifles and a handgun, into his car. He then walked back to his home and set light to the petrol he had just spilled. Now, investigators' best guess is that he intended to flee in his car and hide out somewhere, but listen, the car just wouldn't start. He just filled the tank with petrol and it wouldn't start. For fuck's sake. That small twist of fate then had deadly consequences for many more people. In his fury, Ryan opened fire at his own car with his rifle, and something in him just snapped. Now completely unhindered by conscience, Ryan headed out to begin the deadliest spree in UK history. The killing started almost immediately after Ryan torched his own house and shot up his own car. Ryan then turned his gun straight on his neighbours 2 doors down. Roland and Sheila Mason both were shot and killed. They lived 2 doors down from the Ryans, and it's impossible, in such a small town that they were not at least aware of each other. So why exactly Ryan targeted them as his first victims isn't known. They were just out in their garden, sitting out on chairs in their front garden enjoying the weather, when I guess Ryan simply saw them. He saw them, they were the first things he's seen after he torched his own house and shot up his own car, so it's likely they were just in the wrong place at the very wrong time. As he was walking up the street, Southview Street, after killing the Masons, a woman named Marjorie Jackson, another neighbour of Ryan's, she was returning home from the store, and she saw Michael walking towards her with his rifle in his hand, but she just thought it was an air rifle or something. She in fact had actually heard the shots that had killed the Masons, but again, she thought it was an air rifle, so she was not scared at all. I'm no expert, but I'm pretty sure I would know the difference between an air rifle and an actual rifle. But it just goes to show just how complacent in their feelings of safety people can be. As she was walking home, Ryan fired at Marjorie's feet as she walked by. And what did she do? She simply sped up and went inside her house, thinking he was just messing around with his air rifle. She didn't even call the police. Well, not yet. Ryan then arrived at number 13 Southview Street, and he fired at 2 teenage girls who were just outside the house. One managed to get away, but the other, Lisa Mildenhall, was hit. At just 14, Lisa was the youngest person to be shot that day. Another woman called 999 and asked for an ambulance, and that caller was completely oblivious to the cause of the unfolding carnage, and they could only report they had heard gunshots and there was a lot of blood. Next, Marjorie Jackson, the woman who was unfazed by Ryan after he shot at her feet, well, she happened to get shot then again. Ryan was just walking by and I guess seen her through the window, so he just opened fire at her. She was shot in the back, but somehow she managed to call 999 and tell the police that there was a madman with a gun and that she had just been shot. She managed to call her husband's workplace and managed, despite losing a lot of blood and being in immense pain, to talk to his colleague and tell them what had happened. See, Michael Ryan was simply just going up his own street, opening fire at whoever he's seen. Whether they be neighbors or strangers, he did not care. It seemed like he was almost in this blank state, and nobody would ever say he said anything to them. Whether sorry or you're gonna get it. Like it was like he was a zombie or a robot, just simply shooting everything that moved. So finally, dispatchers began sending ambulances to help the injured, unaware of the danger they were now sending, their paramedics into. Ambulance crews thought they were simply responding to an accident caused by some bored kids playing around with an air rifle. Like, this is in the middle of summer, it was a school holidays at the time, and again, Hungerford. Jesus, this is one of the safest places in the country. There is no actual gunman here, can't be. It's impossible. As the two constables continued onto the scene, word reached one of them, PC Jim Wood, reports of a man walking the streets of Hungerford with a rifle. At first, he kind of thought little of it, knowing that pest and pheasant shooting is pretty common, in a rural town. There'd be hunters around, that kind of stuff. He probably thought, there was a guy walking around with a rifle, but he was just attending an everyday event and it was probably a misunderstanding or a misreporting. The two officers, however, had heard he was on Southview Street, so they planned to close off the road when the later reports, came in. Now, the two officers were going to this place, and they knew that where the reported sightings had been, Southview Street, it's a cul-de-sac, so there's only one way into the street and one way out. It was a dead end. But on the other side, cars couldn't come in alright, but there was a walkway leading to Hungerford Common. So, in order to close the footpath, Jim Wood cut across Hungerford Common while the other officer, Roger Brereton, continued approaching Southview in his car, hoping to close out the main way in via a vehicle. But Ryan, he was still on the footpath, walking up and down Southview Street, and then he started walking towards the common grounds, Hungerford Common. On the way, he met Kenneth Clements on the path. Kenneth had ignored warnings, much like a lot of people would in this story. He had ignored warnings from his neighbor that someone was shooting. Like others, he assumed the shots was just someone playing around or, one of the many legitimate reasons that shots were often heard in this area. Not long after, police were inundated with calls from locals telling them that they'd seen Kenneth Clements being shot. It's amazing just how safe the area was felt to be by residents, that even many, when they were hearing gunshots and seeing a man in army fatigues walking around with a gun, they still didn't feel terrified. It's kind of crazy, and I think that's probably one of the reasons why Ryan was able to do as much damage as he did. Everybody just felt, this doesn't happen here. Now folks, a quick word from this episode's sponsor, and that is Uncommon Goods. The holidays, they sneak up fast. I mean, they're practically around the corner, and it's never too early to get your shopping done. And enjoy it, which I know it sounds like an oxymoron, or at least it does to me. I really dislike shopping, and I am terrible at it. I buy awful gifts for people, and frankly, it's embarrassing, and I'm sick of it. That's where Uncommon Goods is here to save the day. Uncommon Goods makes holiday shopping stress-free and joyful, with thousands of one-of-a-kind gifts you can't find anywhere else. Uncommon Goods looks for products that are high quality, unique, and often handmade or made in the US. Many are crafted by independent artists and small businesses, and because they're made in small batches, the best finds can sell out fast. Folks, I was looking at gifts for my friends and family, and honestly, this stuff is awesome. I found Red Sox stuff for, myself, Philly Eagles stuff for my buddy, and right now I'm looking at Legends of the National Parks, a book full of mysteries for Keith, but don't tell him that, okay? And for you, dear listener, how about a pop-up mystery escape room filled with puzzles, secrets, and spooky surprises? I mean, come on, that's the holidays done and done, and I mean done. That's like, no matter who you're looking for, you will find the perfect gift, and you'll find it nowhere else. Uncommon Goods has something for everyone. From moms and dads to kids and teens, book lovers, history buffs, die-hard sports fans, foodies, mixologists, you'll find thousands of new gift ideas. You simply won't find them anywhere else. And with every purchase you make at Uncommon Goods, they give back $1 to a non-profit partner of your choice. To date, $3 million have been donated by Uncommon Goods. So shop early, have fun, and cross some names off your list today. To get 15% off your next gift, go to uncommongoods.com/chapter. That's uncommongoods.com/chapter for 15% off. Don't miss out on this limited time offer. Uncommon Goods, we're all out of the ordinary. Now, the police's outdated switchboard was struggling. It was, totally inundated. It couldn't keep up with the sheer number of calls coming in. And again, remember, this is a very small police station. There was only 4 police officers in the area at the time. The system that they were getting the calls on highly out of date, and there was only 2 operators available on the emergency lines, meaning on a day like this when everything goes to hell so quickly, and thoroughly trying to sort out what is happening and where, not an easy task. So at this point, Ryan turned around and headed back down the path away from the common towards, the main road where his street exits onto a bigger street. PC Roger Brereton, Police Constable Roger Brereton, was fast approaching from the other end of the street in his police car. Ryan spotted him, took aim with his rifle, and fired multiple shots through the windshield, hitting him. Then Ryan closed in on the car and fired even more shots. Brereton's police radio was sputtering out urgent warnings that there might be an active shooter in the area, and he managed to respond that, "No shit, I just encountered him," and that he'd been hit. But sadly, it was too late for the officer, and he was later found to have died at the scene. And Michael Ryan was now not going to stop for anyone. PC Jim Wood. He arrived on the opposite end of Southview, on that little footpath which led to the common, and there he found the body of Kenneth Clements with a bloody wound to his chest. And Kenneth was being cradled by his son. In the distance, at the very end of the footpath, Jim could see his friend's car, the police car that had just been shot up, and he could also see Michael Ryan as he walked around the police car, firing 23 shots into the windows. Of course, PC Jim Wood. There was nothing he could do even if he wanted to. He didn't have a gun, so any attempt to help his fellow officer simply would have meant certain death for him as well. All he could do was watch on in frozen horror and try and radio to call for an immediate armed response. The police response became much more urgent and tailored to an active shooter than it had been before, now that an officer was calling it in. Now, it was unknown to many people at the time, but Michael Ryan had accidentally picked the best, or, worst for all of us, time for his spree. The tactical firearms team that would have, responded, the armed response force, they were on a routine training exercise almost 45 miles away. So when they got the call, they set out for Hungerford straight away, but with it being kind of a remote, quaint little town, it would take them more than an hour at full speed. And they knew, though, that every second was another squeeze of the trigger, and that meant potentially another life lost. The police helicopter that covered this area, it was in for repairs, couldn't get into the sky until much later on in the day. Now, information was still flowing in from the scene. No one had a clear picture of what exactly was happening on the ground, but it had been confirmed that Roger Brereton and at least one other person was dead. Probably more, possibly a lot more, and definitely more. Neighbor and friend of Roger Brereton, Ernest Holloway, he had heard PC Brereton's call for help over his radio before he was killed. Now, Ernest Holloway was actually PC Police Constable Holloway and was a tactical police weapons instructor. So, shocked and worried for his friend, neighbor, and fellow police officer and hoping to be able to help, Ernest booked it and headed straight to the heart of the incident. Meanwhile, Officer Jim Wood had come eye to eye with Ryan. Ryan began firing his AK-47 at the officer and Kenneth Clements' son, and after a few rounds whizzed past him, the adrenaline kicked in and he ran for the little cover his car could provide. He managed to get in and drive to safety across the common, where he shouted, a warning to picnicking families who were there. He then helped set up a roadblock to stop any more cars from driving down towards the gunman. Unfortunately, it left the other, view of Southview Street open to traffic, so Ryan was able to turn and head away from the police to continue his indiscriminate killing spree. Linda and Alison Chapman were pulling into Southview Street as Ryan walked along it, approaching them from the common end. The mother and daughter saw the police car and Ryan outside, presuming him to be either an officer or a soldier. That presumption, however, only lasted a couple of seconds, as Ryan raised his AK-47 and began firing rounds into the Chapman's car, hitting Alison in the thigh and her mother, Linda, in the shoulder. Linda managed to put the car into reverse as Michael changed magazines, and despite her injuries, she was able to get away before Ryan could reload and finish the job. They'd had a close call and were both seriously hurt, but both were non-fatal injuries. Not long after, a call came through the emergency switchboard from a frantic woman. Her husband, 84-year-old Abdur Khan, was lying unresponsive in the garden of 24 Fairview Road. She was sure he'd been shot, but hadn't seen anything, just heard loud bangs she thought could be gunshots, and then her husband was motionless in the grass. Ryan kept on walking. He walked further down the road, and there he encountered Alan Lepetit, who he shot and left lying injured and bleeding in the street. Once again, Mr. Lepetit had been warned that someone was shooting in the area, but like others, had disregarded the advice and kept on walking towards a shooter. A local ambulance crew dispatched to the scene were the first non-police emergency responders to arrive, and they were met by Ryan, who immediately opened fire on them, hitting one of the crew, causing them to be hit by glass, but luckily they only received a few cuts and bruises. As the ambulance managed to drive away, they called in the shooting and warned the dispatchers not to let any more ambulances come this way. It was simply too dangerous and would only cause more casualties. Next, a fella named George was driving Ivor Jackson back home, and both men were completely unaware that Ivor Jackson's wife, brave old Marjorie, she was currently lying on the kitchen floor having been shot in the back. All they knew was that she'd been injured and she needed help. George and Ivor would have their own run-in with Ryan before they could get back to Marjorie though. Seeing the police car, George considered stopping at the top of the street, Sedview Street, and letting Ivor walk up to his own home, but decided he would drive him all the way down. Suddenly, the left-hand side of the car was showered with bullets from Ryan's AK-47. Both men were hit multiple times, and George died at the scene. Ivor was extremely lucky to survive. PC Ernest Holloway arrived at the cordon, hastily thrown together by PC Jim Wood, and from there he could still see the car of his fallen friend riddled with bullets. Holloway now, he longed for his long-range weapon that was currently sitting in a gun locker at Newbury Police Station. He arranged to have it brought to him and he got in contact with the leadership on the ground. Meanwhile, Michael Ryan's next victim might have been the most mind-boggling of all. The only person that Michael had any real relationship with and who had indulged him in his wild fantasies his entire life was his 61-year-old mother, Dorothy Ryan. And Dorothy was just returning from a shopping trip after attending a job interview, and she ignored warnings from neighbors to stop, try and reason with Michael. She begged him to stop and not to hurt anyone. She probably had no idea, what the extent of his actions had been at that point, and never in a million years would she have thought Michael would turn the gun on her. But he snapped. He didn't even think about it before he pulled the trigger once again, and seconds later watched as his mother's body slumped to the ground in front of him. If there was any doubt before, there was definitely none now. There was only one way this was going to end, with Michael dead or in custody, and one of those things was much more likely than the other. At this point, he had killed 7 people. And the same amount again injured, and the situation was fast spiraling into the worst mass shootings to ever take place on UK soil. Information was coming in broken dribs and drabs. Finally, Deputy Chief Inspector Charles Pollard was given the name of the shooter, and he was told the gunmen his weapons were illegal. That gave the police information. If his weapons were illegal, they'd be able to trace what weapons he had in the system. So it did give the police a better tactical position, in theory, to know what guns he had, but that didn't help them because the guns he had were better than the guns the police had. So they were kind of screwed, and there was still simply no way to track Ryan's location in real time. Now, killing his mother seemed to have been jarring even for Michael Ryan, and he moved away from the busier streets near his home and headed towards a place called Memorial Gardens. The fugue state that, killing his mother gave him, it lifted quickly as he walked, and then as he continued walking, he shot and injured 71-year-old Betty, who was out in her garden at the time. Then, arriving at Memorial Gardens, Ryan spotted a 26-year-old named Francis walking his dog, and Francis was the second youngest person to die at Michael Ryan's hands. Leaving the gardens, Ryan threw down one of the 2 rifles he was carrying, an Underwood carbine. Now armed with just the AK-47 and the Beretta pistol, he took aim at a taxi being driven by 30-year-old Marcus, a well-known figure in the area owing to his job and sociable nature. The taxi had been approaching Ryan, and after a flurry of bullets, Marcus died right there, his wife having recently given birth to their first child. Yet more incidents joining the fast-growing list of lives taken or ruined by Ryan. Michael then threw down the AK, as he had done with the carbine just before. He threw the AK-47 to the ground, but then seemed to change his mind, and he picked it back up again. From now on, though, he solely relied on the use of his Beretta, for which he had plenty of ammunition left. a witness to the murder of Marcus, later said it looked as though Ryan had almost come to his senses for a split second, realizing what he had done and thrown down the gun as if, in horror at what he'd just been doing. But then that regret didn't seem to last very long, and he picked up the gun, even though it was out of ammunition, and just kept on walking. Guns akimbo. Ryan walked on then to the end of the lane where he was on, the lane kind of formed part of a junction with an avenue. There he shot at Anne Honeybone, who was driving. Luckily, she only suffered minor injuries and was able to escape the serious consequences of her misfortune to run into Michael Ryan. Ryan then proceeded down the avenue, which actually took him back in the direction of his home street, Southview Street, which by now, was the place, I guess, of his former home, because it burned to the ground, along with several other houses on the same terrace after he lit fire to the gasoline he'd spread everywhere. Fire crews were obviously unable to respond to the blaze. They almost couldn't prevent the whole place from being burned to the ground, the entire block. 49-year-old John was next to join the list of casualties. Sitting in his parked Renault, he'd only just caught sight of Ryan approaching him from the junction when Ryan lifted his Beretta pistol and fired, seriously injuring his target. John, however, was one of the lucky ones and would ultimately survive. The next two people to find themselves targets of Ryan's rage were not so fortunate, and were maybe part of the biggest tragedy within a tragedy of all the day's events. Now, one of Hungerford's 14-strong police force was Police Constable Trevor Wainwright. PC Wainwright was off work that day. Policing, at least. He actually had his other part-time job that he used to supplement his income. As I said at the start, a lot of the police officers in Hungerford, they didn't work there full-time. There just wasn't enough hours. It just wasn't busy enough to be able to warrant having that many full-time cops. However, unknown to PC Wainwright, his parents, Douglas and Kathleen Wainwright, 62 years old both of them, were on their way to visit their son's home on Priory Road. They were planning on surprising their son with a visit after they'd recently sold their house and were looking forward to some much-needed rest and relaxation in their golden years. PC Wainwright was unaware of the chaos and turmoil that was exploding across his sleepy hometown until he got that dreaded phone call from a colleague. His parents had been parked outside his house, and Ryan had moved his sights on them. Douglas was shot and killed. Kathleen barely survived. Continuing along the road, he opened fire at two separate vans that drove past, injuring one driver and killing the other. Then he shot and killed 22-year-old Sandra Hill, who was driving her Renault unaware of the potential danger ahead. At just 22 years old, she would be the youngest person to be killed. With the repairs to the police helicopter not even completed yet, it was rushed out of the repair bay. It'll do, right? Get it in the air. The pilot was taking a huge risk, obviously, as you can imagine, as did his passenger, PC Ernest Holloway, the tactical weapons instructor, who was now kitted up. He got his rifle. He was still outgunned, but the plan was, if they were able to find Ryan, spot him from the air, the helicopter could drop Holloway nearby and, well, Ernest over here would be able to take him out. In response to the helicopter above, Ryan turned and walked back down the street towards a school named John O'Gaunt. However, as he was walking, he suddenly stopped when he reached number 60 Priory Road and just busted straight through the door of this terraced house. He broke in and began shooting indiscriminately inside this tiny little home. Why he targeted this house, it's unclear, but likely he was just trying to stay out of sight of the chopper, and more importantly for his health, out of the sights of Ernest Holloway's service weapon. Number 60 Priory Road was home to 66-year-old Victor and Myrtle Gibbs. Both were home at the time. It's possible maybe Ryan, as he walked, maybe he saw them through the window, waving at him or something. But whatever the reason, Victor was shot and died almost immediately. Myrtle, she was critically injured. She did manage to cling to life for a short time, but ultimately succumbed to her wounds later on in hospital. When they were found, Victor was laid across his wife Myrtle. He had died trying to protect her. Ryan then walked out of that house and he opened fire at the houses that were on the other side of the street, hitting one Michael Jennings and one Myra Gator. Both would be seriously injured, but both would survive. Throughout all of this, calls were continuing to pour into the emergency lines. Most calls were begging for help. The death toll was only going to increase if they couldn't do something soon to bring the siege to an end very soon. You had this crazy young man just walking the streets, indiscriminately shooting every single person he saw. And the police were powerless, really, to do anything. And their response was simply far too slow. But again, they just did not expect this thing to happen in a place like this. Finally, Ernest Holloway received his full kit, which included like a long-range sniper-style rifle. If he could get Michael Ryan even remotely in his sights, he could take him out, stop the rampage dead in its tracks. And Holloway was hoping that would happen. He was hoping that Michael would try and shoot at a helicopter, giving away his location. But sadly, Holloway didn't get the chance to get him in his sights. Michael Ryan would go on to murder another man driving by, 34-year-old Ian Plale. He then shot and injured 67-year-old George Noon as he walked by. And then, at 12:15 p.m, the tactical firearms team finally arrived in Hungerford and set out to find Ryan and finish him. Now, they did get a helping hand and a lucky break when they heard Ernest Holloway's voice come over the radio, telling them that the helicopter he was in was being shot at. So out of options, and with the net closing in, Ryan barricaded himself inside the John O. Gaunt Community Technology College. Just as Holloway had hoped, the shots had given away his real-time location at last, and so they were able to finally corner him inside this school. The technical team were relieved to find out there actually was only one shooter the entire time, and now they knew where he was and he was safely away from any innocents. The school had already been opened, but even still, it was in the middle of summer holidays, so probably wouldn't have been anyone there anyway. Ryan now knew it was over, and the police knew it was over. It was just a matter of time. It was up to Ryan at this point. Would he end up in custody or in a pool of his own blood on the ground? There was no other way out. He couldn't escape. Ultimately, though, if they could get him into custody, at least the families of the dead and the injured would be able to face him in court, maybe even try and get some answers as to why he snapped. After all, the only two people who could possibly provide insight into Ryan's reasoning and motives on the 19th of August 1987 was Dorothy and Michael himself. At around 5:30 p.m. that day, when he was spotted in the school by officers, until nearly 7 p.m. in the evening, an hour and a half, the police continued. They attempted to negotiate with Ryan to give up his guns and come out and surrender. Ryan, in the meantime, he shouted out from the school. He asked several times about his mother, though they were sure he must have known that he had killed her. He shot her point blank and watched her fall to the ground. He still continued to ask them about how she was, which kind of really does lead me to believe that he had snapped, was in this like alternate state of mind, in this fugue state the entire time. I mean, I'm not going to say give him the get out of jail free card of, oh, he didn't know what he was doing. He fucking knew what he was doing. But I don't know. There was something, it's like something had taken over his mind. He was like a zombie that day. However, the police outside, they still had no idea of how much ammunition he had. However, they would later find out that he had actually run out of rifle rounds. His assault rifle, AK-47, was empty. And his claim to only have one round left for his Beretta pistol, that claim was true. He was saying to the police he only had one bullet left and he wasn't lying. But none of it really mattered at all anyway, because Ryan would find a use for that last bullet. At around 6:45 p.m, Michael Ryan asked officers for the time. They said, hey, guess what? 7:15. Shortly after that, a final gunshot was heard, and tactical officers breached the school only to find Ryan had committed his final act of evil towards the victims by robbing them of the possibility of answers and the chance to get justice in court. I mean, that said, let's face it, the world is a better place without Ryan in it, and if you just started a day with doing that, eating a pistol instead of taking out so many innocent people, a lot of pain and suffering could have been prevented. I mean, the town of Hungerford is never the same. The community was absolutely shattered. Many of the officers who actually responded would end up leaving the police altogether after what had happened. The best estimates suggest that by the end of it, he had fired 119 rounds from 3 of the weapons he had with him. And in the wake of what has gone down in history as the United Kingdom's worst spree shooting incident, a lot of things did change very quickly. A report was published, which was actually the basis for this one. I'd recommend reading if you want to learn more about it. But legislation was brought in after the incident in Hungerford that banned semi-automatic rifles. There was around 8,000 of them in private hands across the UK. Problems with, police responses, real-time communication, that slowed the whole thing down. Emergency Services 999 system, that was totally overhauled and modernized. Officers were issued with brand new radios. Essentially, it modernized a lot of, the real-time reaction of police. In total, 17 people died. And, 16 innocents and then 1 piece of shit died. 17 people if you're including Michael Ryan. But over 15 people were injured. And at the end of the day, why he did this, no one really knows at all. Did he snap? Was it just rage he had inside him that he just put out externally to just murder everybody around him due to years of loneliness? He lived in these fantasies. Maybe he thought he was in a fantasy, that what he was doing wasn't real. Who really knows? The only reason you kind of want to know is so it doesn't happen again, because who really gives a shit about Michael Ryan?
Cocksucker.
In the town today, there's a memorial that was established for the victims of the tragedy. And there you have it. That is the story of the Hungerford Massacre. Some people find this, calling it even the Hungerford Massacre, to be kind of offensive. I was reading one quote. Others refer to it as just the Hungerford tragedy. Well, I guess I'll just use Massacre because that's what it's known as. It's a pretty heavy one for today for you folks. So hope that kind of suits you. As I said, this is a really fascinating story. I mean, fascinating in the worst possible way, but it's also a highly requested topic I cover. So there you go. I won't be taking any more suggestions if this is the kind of ones I'm getting. But yeah. Here, listen, please, thank you so much for listening. I appreciate you taking time to listen to That Shepherd podcast. Please tune in next week when I'll probably be joined by either Keith telling you some weird-ass ghost stories, or the Warthog for some other weird-ass ghost stories. Who knows, but more crime, mystery, and murder ahead. So until the next old episode, which is out every single Monday morning, please take care of each other and yourselves, because guess what? I love you. Mike out.